I'm still recovering from listening to Ron. It was very exciting. I know you don't have this poem, but I wrote it this morning and I just want to read it before I start on these slides. Being older. I was always the oldest out of us 3 kids, but I was the youngest when in, about, and amidst. As the years went by and even older grew I didn't notice them, just all the other bits. When they talked, their mouths and bodies moved. It seemed they were privy to a dance I could not groove. I tried, of course, more than once, but no one did approve of my take on life, which caused strife more than once. I thought it best to end my life. As more and more the years moved on, something magic happened. I accepted I could not dance and developed instead my song. Within this song of acceptance, of pride in who I am, I grew stronger and more in tune with all indeed I can. Aging comes to us all, but will mean different things. For me, it is aging that's given me my wings. Okay, thanks. It's almost one thing you can guarantee, if you don't die before, that we will all get older and then die. Is that right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay, thanks. So some of the things I hope we can expect from this talk about autism and aging, and there are 5 kind of key areas that I hope we can talk about: memory, movement, sensory profiling, and that's 2 words, but it's one area, language and autonomy. Just to touch on some of those things, aging's about a lot more than this, but it's different becoming an older person, an autistic older person, than being an autistic child. And lots of stuff that's out there for kids doesn't really apply to us as older people. And we need to explore this because the world is set. It's like we're all I don't know about drooling, if that's the right word, but we're all drawn to the kitten and not so much to the cat. Is that right? Yeah. Well, I'm not. I love both, personally. But you can understand what's more appealing. And I think this is one of the reasons the world isn't as ready for those of us getting older as autistic people, but it needs to be. Aging, some of the similarities, but as in being a typically developing person, and excuse the expression, don't know how else to call you, those people who don't qualify to being autistic are typical. And they are in the majority, but I'm not sure for how much longer. So and that could be interesting. But some of those differences between seniors in the typical world and in the autism world, and then those differences between seniors in autism and children. Some of those are things like, as you get older, as an autistic person, you're more likely to be able to read facial expressions than you were when you were a kid. You're less likely to have memory issues. That's a big thing. You'll have a different sensory profile. You know, we often adjust because we're forced to, being in classrooms and busy places, but as you get older, you can choose not to go. You can go at those special sensory times when they reduce the lights, and those special times when they have shopping and supermarkets open, when there's less people, etc., etc. You can make that choice. You often can't make those choices as a kid. We have different language and mobility issues to children. And I hope that we might have moved on from struggling to come to terms with who we are to a place of acceptance. And that's a big issue. I certainly wasn't there as a kid. So for memory is, in autism, is very much influenced by being literal, by the routines that are dictated by our understanding, rather than negotiation, which people kind of think of as common sense. I don't always agree, but that's how it's seen. Short-term memory might present some problems, as it does for all of us, but I think this whole idea of not easily forgetting is problematic as we get older, because it's actually the opposite to the typical brain, where there's a loss in plasticity. As we get older, I think this is quite exciting. As autistic people, our brain can increase in plasticity. That doesn't mean we become more plasticine, just in case you're worried, or more plastic. It just is a term that means we're more malleable, we're open to more things. There's a change in how the brain is actually accommodating more information than it did as a kid. There is also, and right from the start to end of time, there's a processing issue, as for those of us who are autistic. And I know I'm speaking very generally, but that delay in understanding the world just continues for me. And that's quite difficult, because what happens as you get older is you also often become a little bit deaf. Have you noticed? So people have been shouting at me forever. Not just when I was a kid because they thought I didn't understand, but it gets worse as you get older, because then they think you might be deaf as well. And then what can happen is that we just switch off. We fail to notice. So either way, child or an older person, yes, there is this processing delay, and we do need time. I love that 10-second rule. It hasn't changed for me. I stay back and watch so much going on. I find it quite difficult to enter a conversation unless it's one-on-one that I can be part of because of that processing time. So not able to forget implications. Well, obviously change in anything is going to feel quite wrong, because that literal kind of memory stuff is going to be the thing that dictates how something should be. And if you can't forget it, then you're going to be quite likely much more upset. That verbal information is going to be confusing. A whole heap of implications flow on from memory and literal understanding. And what if, as you get older, or if you have a sensory disposition, you can't really feel your bodily functions. You don't notice whether you're hungry or not. This isn't new for me. I've been like this forever. Okay, ever is still ongoing. You know what I mean? Bladder and bowel connections are quite difficult. Quite often in autism, they're difficult to separate. Feelings of tiredness. People say to me, "Are you tired?" And I say, "Well, I probably am." How do you know? How do you know? Well, it's something about how you feel. Well, I usually feel with my fingers, so that doesn't quite work for me. But what they mean is an internal knowledge of tiredness, and I still find that quite difficult. But possibly as you get older, there are other reasons why tiredness might be less available or more so. I noticed this, my mum, who's definitely on the autism spectrum, even if she's not diagnosed, and even if it's a cultural construct, etc. She's ever so autistic. She says, well, why would I want to go to bed at 11? I mean, at 8:30, she said everything closes down in the home where she's living. They all seem to go to bed at 8:30. She said, why would I want to do that? Does that make sense? I want to watch the football. I want to watch this. I want to do that. I've got so many things still going on. She can't understand why all these people around her are going to bed and everything is closing down and getting ready for bed. Just should be tired at 8:30. And this is because as older people, we do so much more in our lives. We're out there racing around, getting so much done. We're getting tired physically. Not. It's a strange thing, isn't it, that we have this understanding that we should be more tired. I think we can be more tired. Don't get me wrong, I think we can be, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. Object permanence means knowing something exists even when it's out of sight. This is a whole area that people are not paying attention to at all, and it will impact on what we believe, what we understand, and what we think we can do. We need to look at this, and I know I haven't got time to look at this in more detail, but we need to. Can we build new memories? This was then, that was then, this is now. I think this is very important. So that, is it really out of mind just because it's out of sight? Visuals, technology, role play, newsletters, these are all things that are employed in the home where my mother is. But do you know they have an intercom in the ceiling, and so they announce things into her room through the intercom, and every time this happens, she jumps. It's sudden. It's, why is this happening? What are they saying? What does this mean? It freaks her out, and this happens once or twice a day. So fortunately, we've been able to get the intercom to her room turned off. But Possibly sharing of information could be done differently that wouldn't be so upsetting for her. If we remove the bias in memory with facts using interest, particular interest to that individual, I think we can build new memories. And I think technology is often an enabler. I couldn't use a microwave for a very long time. My mum was much faster. So there's a personality difference between us. She is much quicker with things like mobile phones, etc., learning to text. As long as you had a phone with a big enough print, big enough text, she was much better at those sorts of things. Movement facilitates brain connections and learning. We all know that that activity, that walking and that moving encourages the brain to learn and be available. And yet in age, as in older age, we walk less, we move less, we're not so motivated. People have a lot of sensory motivation in the typical world to move around, to connect, but that's less likely for us. We're not noticing. We're not, therefore, responding with movement and motor action either. We're more likely to battle catatonia and freezing, especially physically, when under undue stress and anxiety, than our non-ASC, stands for Autism Spectrum Condition, and I apologise for that. Unsure which terms to use. Anyway, our senses ultimately speak to our muscles and it enables us to do things. But if there's a sensory disconnection, then we're less likely to move. So you're going to need to find things that will motivate us, that are particular to that person, that will encourage them to move around. A lack of motivation to join clubs, to socialise is dominant. Why would you want to join in with other people when it is so overwhelming? And yet, you know, as you get older, you lose friends. Did you know this? Because they die. Yeah, they die. I mean, you might lose friends for other reasons, but this is a common one. And for us, it's not so easy to reconnect, to make new friends. And yet there's this huge need to work, live, love within our particular interest or passion. Because outside of this, I'm disconnected. You probably all feel the same, but maybe you've got a few more tools, a few more things available to help you build connection and build understanding that are just not so available to me. So these are going to be delayed. I think we can delay a whole lot of problems like health issues, immune disorders, autoimmune in particular, physical disorders and aspects of immobility if we try to prevent or motivate a person by using something of interest to them. When I did a survey and surveyed older people on the spectrum about what they would like as for their older years, many of them said, I need my garden, I need my knitting, I need my reading, I need the things that they enjoyed and they loved, they wanted to stay and continue with. They weren't willing to explore new things so much. That was a more difficult thing. And yet quite often the things that are taken from us are the very things that we love. Those are the things that we lose. And it's very difficult to make or access new ways to build those. Sensory issues we found in autism were actually more likely to get worse over time for quite a lot of people, mainly because they weren't so exposed to those sorts of things as they were forced to being as kids. And I don't think it's always beneficial to reduce or increase sensory loading according to whether they're under exposed or overwhelmed. I think it's more necessary to find ways to accommodate them. I've actually been quite pleased that people have been clapping. I know that I was taught to do flapping instead of clapping, etc. But I liked what somebody said on that very first day, that maybe we just need to put fingers in our ears, put our earplugs in and our headphones on when things are overwhelmed. I do this all the time to reduce noise levels, because otherwise I find I want to go up to people and say, stop that. Just don't do that. That's too upsetting and too irritating. And that takes a lot of energy. I think it's better that I become equipped to help me live in the world that we're all part of, rather than not always trying to take those things away. I mean, I know it's both. We both have to work together in these things, absolutely. I don't really like the word pre-verbal. I don't like non-verbal, so I haven't come up with one that I quite like yet. But lots of folk can't speak in the world of autism, and this is going to mean, I think, that we need to communicate quite differently. And I love the fact that technology does this. That was amazing listening to Anne earlier. If any of you were in that session, I was very excited just being there. It was hard not to cry. And Wendy Key-Bright. I don't know if you were in that session, but it was really, for me, that's exciting to see. And it is surprising how quickly those of us, even without talking, can catch on to this whole idea of technology. At one of the conferences in Victoria in Australia, they had, I think it's the wrong term, they had this quiet room. Have you come across that term? Okay, it was really loud in this quiet room. Because they had all these computers around the side, and lots of people, autistic people, were on the computers, emailing and texting each other to each other who were in the same room. Yeah? There was brilliant communication going on without a lot of talking, and without a lot of the distractions that come with that talking. And I think this is actually a smoother way to communicate. I wish we'll have to give it a different name. Quiet room doesn't work. Autistic space is better, I think, where we can actually communicate in the way that suits us. And you can still have a quiet room if someone wants to go to sleep or something, but I think that's a different concept. And as you get older, as an autistic person, conversations can be more demanding. You've got to process, you've got to hear, you've got to decode and all of that, whereas I think technology a lot of the time can do that for us. And autonomy, building an understanding that I'm okay. Remembering that forgetting is less likely to happen in autism than it does in the typical population. I spoke to somebody earlier, and actually some of the research says dementia is less likely. Because of that plasticity of brain, it's actually less likely in autism. It doesn't mean that some people who are autistic won't also experience dementia, but it is actually less likely than in the typical population. But at the same time, there's going to be an increase in things like depression and anxiety because of our changed circumstances, because people we've attached to will die, because parents will leave, because family life will change, because all that we've known will be taken away from us. So we've got to temper these two understandings. Movement and mobility for seniors is often overlooked. I've said that already. We don't get involved in the world in the same way. So using what's of interest to us, that means you're going to have to discover and use that means for motivation. You're going to get to know us, please. What's age appropriate? I always laugh at this one. I might be 66, 79, 97 physically, but what age am I emotionally? As autistic people, we often look younger than we are. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't resist that. I read it somewhere, and I thought, oh, all right, then I'll say that. If I'm 70 with an emotional age, or cognitive or social age of a 6-year-old, is it really appropriate to try to make me responsible for my hygiene, health, routine, blah, blah, blah? Well, it might be some of those things. 6-year-olds can be pretty good at hygiene and various things, etc. But I am going to need parenting much longer, and who's going to do it? My own family are going to be too old, too tired, not equipped for the job. Who's going to do it? We'll need to be thinking about these things seriously. I mean, this is not just now. This is an ongoing need that started many, many years ago. So we have to be thinking about this. There was some emphasis on some of the talks I've heard during this time about independence and building independence and getting kids to be independent. Well, it all changes as you get older to being interdependent. I'm going to need other people in a bigger way. So I'm going to need to know how to request help, where to go, how to use it. Different personalities. As autistic people, we're all very different, as you know. So some of us are going to be outgoing, some are going to be shy, some are going to be rigid. It's not one size fits all. We've heard this lots of times. So we're going to need to adapt how we relate to older people. Some of the personality types, I don't like this, okay? It's far too black and white. But as an autistic person, I'm supposed to be into black and white and very literal and so on, so I thought I'd better use it. Will my personality fit the lifestyle changes expected of an aged person? I'm constantly asking myself, oh dear, when I just tell you this is the first time I've worn these clothes, ever. Now, I never, usually, well, obviously I broke that today, wear something that I've not worn before. But I'd set this side, this is my Scottish thing for being in Scotland, and my wife said, you can't wear that, it's too short, see? And I said, I don't care, right? It's Scottish looking. This is where I get into trouble, isn't it? So I'm going to wear it, because it makes me feel good. I haven't got, anyway, never mind. Okay, family and professionals, training, support, ongoing working with kittens and children, yes, but we need to find out more about working with the pussycats as they age. We need to work more with older people. Technology, absolutely, but what of home design? Please don't go designing aged care facilities with intercoms in the ceiling. There are so many things that I've had to talk to the home about with my mum that are very, very difficult for her. The expectations and the typical ways people communicate, the constant changing of staff, etc., all very, very difficult. Yeah, all right. So as you age, typically you might go through these sorts of stages if you're a fella. I don't know, women lose hair as well. I've noticed it around the place. But anyway, what if you don't travel through these stages succinctly as an older person in the spectrum, and we don't? It just is not quite like this for those of us aging. What about dental, medical, psychological appointments? Who's going to make these? Who's going to organise us to get there? Education, housing, aids and equipment, all these things. I mean, I'm going over stuff that you already know. But do we consider sex ed is necessary and travel support for the ageing population? Well, the answer is yes. You know this, don't you? It's just as important as it is for children. Support with budgeting, organising things, general do this, don't do that. That would be very useful. My daughter, who came to our home many times, has been to our home many times, but at one point in time, she came and she used masking tape and she labelled in my laundry cupboard things like single sheets, double sheets. I found all that very helpful because I stand there with things and I don't know where they go. So I just put them in piles around me and people trip over them. And they say you should tidy up, but nobody tells you how. As an older person, I still need that. It's not something I've kind of grasped. So for whom is this process so succinctly demonstrated? It's not like this in the world of autism. If you're aloof or if you're shy, highly embarrassable, you might avoid the limelight. You might become easily anxious. You might be tactile avoidant. How often do you see somebody take an older person by the arm or put their hand on their shoulder? This might not work in autism. What if you don't answer to your name or answer the door or answer the phone? Their usual means to access support. I've got to look at the time. Uh-oh. These might not be available for us, so we're going to have to find alternatives. I like Skype. I like email, I like texting, because they're more likely to get my attention than these other ways. So some of the questions to ask: what helps me to feel comfortable? Getting to see and know the same person on a regular basis would be helpful. Do we need to meet at my home or some appointed location? Do we need a noisy or a quiet environment? Don't take these things for granted. They'll be different for different people. Do I prefer a set list of questions or being asked without warning or processing time? If you give me a written down question for me to process and then ask me to answer it, I'll actually get quite lost, because the time it takes me to read, think about, and get caught up in those words is overwhelming. I'm better at you just asking me direct, and I'll think direct without too much time. But that's me. A lot of autistic people won't be like me, so we need to think about this. Passive or unmotivated, what could you do that would mean I want to go too? How can you discover my interests or motivations? How can you help me identify and label my needs? And listening to Anne, it's obvious. Just because you don't talk doesn't mean you don't have a need to say. It just means that you'll need to say it differently, maybe not through speech. How can you walk beside me to help support me in getting access? How do we keep momentum and maintain the support? And maintenance of support is absolutely vital. If you're a bit active, but some might perceive you as odd, apparently that's me, then maybe I'd be happy to be part of a group who support my interests, but I'm going to need to know how. All the process of aging require appropriate communication for that individual. I need to understand about the changes of things like, what do I do after retirement? Just the word. Do you know what retirement means? Is it just, I'm leaving the workforce now? Does that mean I come back on Monday? Hello? Think about that literal use of language. We need this to be understood. I need to understand what it means to move beyond being at work and home. I need to understand why it's good to look after my health, my budget. I don't have one, I don't think. My sleep, my social connections. Whatever it is, I need to understand it before I can do. Being unable to speak is not the same as not thinking. We've said this lots of times, and I might need augmented or facilitated communication to help me communicate my needs. People have said to me, when you cannot speak for people on the autism spectrum who are non-verbal, who have an intellectual disability, who are whatever, I can't speak for those who don't have those things. I can only speak for me. They can speak for themselves. We just need to know how to give them access that enables them to speak for themselves. So resources, we want people who will care. We want homes designed for ASD and aging. We want technology to communicate our dreams, desires, goals and needs, etc., etc., etc. There is lots that we can be doing and that we should be doing right now already, because aging isn't something that happens down the track. It happens from the minute we're born. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, well, we're supposed to stop, and I'm supposed to say, all those things I haven't talked about, feel free to email me and tell me so that I can reply. Thank you.